Hi, everybody. Good morning. I think this is my first ever forum because I am always in RE during this hour. So now I get to see what's actually what goes on here. Um, so it's fun to be here, and thanks for tuning in on this cold morning. I hope you have a nice warm cup of tea or coffee with you. Um, and yeah, I'm just really thrilled that you're here to talk about this really crucial issue in our region right now. I've had um, the opportunity to spend a good deal of time at the camp in Palisade and had some really lengthy and meaningful conversations with many of the indigenous leaders of this movement. And one thing I hear from them time and time again is that this is a fight against a pipeline, yes, but it's more than that. It's really a spiritual journey, and so it's not just resistance to the pipeline, but also to colonialism, to practices of extraction, to colonization, to really just destruction of our earth and the people who live here. And it's also a way for us to engage in relationship building and some necessary healing and repair work. So so let's just kind of remember that as we go into this. When you drive into the camp in Palisade, actually, there's a big sign that says "Check your ego here," and that's just a good reminder. I think anytime we're discussing these issues, because if you're not Indigenous, of course, you're a settler on these lands. You're living on stolen land, and really important to just keep that perspective in mind as we move into these discussions. So yeah, most of you know me. I'm Katie. I'm the director of family ministry here at UUCD. But I'm here today wearing my MUUSJA hat. I'm also the regional organizer for MUUSJA in the Northland region, and recently appointed by UUSC, that's the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, as the Line 3 Resistance Coordinator. So, so kind of wearing those two hats here with you today. And I'm joined by Rita Chamblin, who resides in Bemidji, and she is the MNIPL Bemidji liaison, also a Unitarian Universalist lay leader, and climate justice advocate, and a Line 3 resistance activist for many years. I know Rita's very involved in the Watch the Line movement, which she'll talk to us a little bit about. Beth Tamminen is here too. She chairs the climate action team here at UUCD and is the MNIPL liaison for the Lake Superior Network. And we are so lucky to have those two women with us here today. I will just say, every time I am with them, I learn so much and just gain really valuable insights. So thank you both for being with us today. And Brett Cease is here too. He's also active in climate justice, and recently was up at the Palisade camp as well. So Brett, feel free to chime in anytime here with any of your insights or knowledge. So yeah, we thought it would be important, just given the topic, to start with a land acknowledgement. And I know that those can be imperfect and tricky, but given this topic, we thought it was really important to set the context by grounding ourselves in space and time and location. And this statement that I'm going to read is adapted from the one that was drafted at the University of Minnesota Duluth and is now used by the city of Duluth in all of their public convenings as of a couple months ago, which is a really cool development. So here it is. We gather together as a community of seekers to honor the interdependence of life, to respect the dignity of all, and to honor the land we walk humbly upon. Let us acknowledge that UUCD's spiritual home is located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. Our building and grounds reside on land that was cared for and called home by the Ojibwe people. before them the Dakota and Northern Cheyenne people, and other native peoples from time immemorial. Ceded by the Ojibwe in an 1854 treaty, this land holds great historical, spiritual, and personal significance for its original stewards, the Native nations and peoples of this region. We recognize and will continually support and advocate for the sovereignty of the Native nations in this territory and beyond. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty and will work to hold our congregation accountable to American Indian peoples and nations. So with that, I will turn things over to Rita, who will offer us an overview of what's going on with Line 3, legal developments, construction developments, and some of the background and history that's really important for us all to be aware of. And following that, Beth will give some insights and we'll open it up for questions. So Rita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katie. So Line 3, what is going on? So all those blue markers along this route for Line 3 are water crossings on the new route. There are over 200 of them. And the new route will cross over 79 miles of wetlands. And here's what's happening on the route right now. These are not stock photos. These are actual photos from the front line. And the construction pictured is mostly at or to get access to water crossings. And as you can see, law enforcement is very present and visible. But here's a quick history of how we got there, right? 2015 is when Enbridge applied for this new route. And it was also the year that the Friends of the Headwaters suit against the state was upheld in the Supreme Court and this is the first pipeline where an environmental impact statement was required. That environmental impact statement was scoped in 2016. And the state came out with the draft and the final environmental impact statement for public meetings and hearings in 2017. 2018 was very active, as you can see. The Public Utilities Commission said that the environmental impact statement was adequate. Appeals were filed. The Department of Commerce said that the Line 3 wasn't needed. Why? Because this is tar sands oil that's coming across northern Minnesota and intended for export. Our refineries in Minnesota are full. They've got everything they need. So the expanded capacity of Line 3 was never justified. The administrative law judge said that the only way that this worked is for an in-trench replacement. In other words, they couldn't go outside of the current mainline corridor. Yet the Public Utilities Commission still granted the certificate of need and route permit for their preferred route. And it's important to know that there were a variety of choices of routes for this, right? That was the point at which Fond du Lac was given two choices in 60 days to decide. Very bad choices, right? Either it goes through the reservation or it goes through a culturally sensitive and sacred place. And appeals were filed at that point by the Department of Commerce, as well as a whole host of other people. But being as I'm talking to you in Duluth, I think it's really important to understand this, this crux of the matter for the Fond du Lac band, right? To understand that they were put into a very tough situation by the state. In 2019, the Court of Appeals reversed that decision about the environmental impact statement, and the state spent the year creating a new environmental impact statement. And last year, the Department of Commerce came back again, said Enbridge still hasn't proven the need for this, yet the PUC approved this project on a 3-1 vote. We were happy that Matt Sugar did vote against this. Appeals were immediately filed, yet through the year, the DNR, the MPCA, which is the Pollution Control Agency, and the Army Corps of Engineers issued their permits. The last permits were issued at the end of November of last year. Appeals were filed and Enbridge started construction in December. Motions for stay of construction were filed and denied at the state level, and then they were appealed. And we'll talk about that more in a bit. So I lived in the late 70s to early 90s. I lived in the Twin Cities. I got transferred to Texas and ultimately moved back to Minnesota. And this is where I landed. And I knew that I would be situated between 3 reservations. What I didn't fully understand was that I was moving into the 1855 treaty territory. And on this slide, you can see the treaty territory right here. Now you're in the 1854 treaty territory, and that's where Fond du Lac is. So I moved to Ojibwe territory. And I knew that I would be facing line 3. This is the existing line 3, that black line. The red line is the new line 3. Now, what are treaty rights? Treaty rights apply to this entire treaty territory, right? And the rights that we're familiar with, the rights to hunt, gather, fish, and prey, to engage in the lifeways of the tribe. Yet the environmental impact statement was clear that this project, both the construction of the project and the operation of the project, as well as the potential risks of a spill from this project, were going to have a disproportionate impact on my Indigenous neighbors, a disproportionate impact on their lifeways. And that's such a clear reminder, right, of the ongoing consequences of colonialism in this region. Yet here we are again, exploiting our Indigenous neighbors, threatening culture and lifeways. And when we're called as Unitarian Universalists to stand for greater liberation for all people, here in Northern Minnesota, that means to me that we stand as treaty people with our Anishinaabe neighbors. And when we create more than 85 square miles of poisonous tailing ponds in Alberta to extract tar sands, when we fragment forests and trench pipelines into Northern Minnesota wetlands, when we risk our water with projects like Line 3, we're clearly failing to respect the interdependent web of all existence. Yet I covenant to respect that interdependent web, water, soil, air, and all beings. And our interconnectedness is frayed with projects like Line 3. Now, something I ask myself frequently is, can we only care about climate change when it touches us personally? This is tar sands oil that's going through this pipeline, the dirtiest in the world. Line 3's climate change impacts exceed any action the Walz administration can take to reduce our state's contribution to climate change. This new Line 3 is equivalent to turning on 50 coal-fired power plants. And who takes the brunt of climate change impacts? Well, the most vulnerable. And so we know that those who contributed the least are impacted the most. So why are we in this hard situation? Well, some of these people are folks that you'd expect, right? Fossil fuel companies and Enbridge. But also, the state of Minnesota has failed us. The Public Utilities Commission refused to take into account climate change and treaty impacts. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency followed along in that path, and neither of those agencies took serious looks at alternative routes. Governor Walz issued an executive order expanding tribal-state relations, claiming that it ensured that the state of Minnesota and the 11 tribes in the state would engage in true government-to-government relations built on respect, understanding, and sovereignty, but that has not played out in this Line 3 permitting process. And I put the Department of Commerce on this list because they failed to join us on the appeal for a stay of construction. Now, why do I have a sense of urgency? Well, the overall appeals on the environmental impact statement, the certificate of need, the route permit will be decided in the summer, but construction is happening right now. And as I mentioned, we had appeals for a stay of construction at both the state and the federal level. Well, just this past week, we lost on the state level. We're still open on the federal level for a stay of construction. And that's really important because there's destruction happening right now. Destruction in areas where I have Indigenous friends who gather berries out in an area that is currently being torn apart, right? In areas that impact the water flow into wild rice areas. Now, who's appealing? Well, this is a list of the groups that are appealing the Line 3 decisions: Friends of the Headwater, Honor, the White Earth and Red Lake, Sierra Club, Youth Climate Interveners, and the Department of Commerce. There are additional groups opposing Line 3. This is not exhaustive, but some of these you know: MN 350, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. Some you might not know: Rise Coalition, which is an Indigenous-led group, Indigenous Environmental Network, GINIW Collective, Gitchigumi Scouts, which you might know or become more familiar with because they're headquartered and led out of Fond du Lac. Northfield Against Line 3, very much action-oriented. Science for the People and Physicians for Social Responsibilities have done wonders in terms of their work in testimony. And also Science for the People is actively involved right now, continuing to work in a variety of ways. And then Watch the Line, which is a group I'm on the planning team for, where we closely and legally monitor the construction of this pipeline. Now, Karen Wills of MUUSJA built the basis for this slide, having adapted the concept from a presentation by Katya Hansen of UU Rise and Ranwa Hamanani of Drum. So the question is, what is there for us to do? Act on the front lines. Currently, nonviolent direct action is the only thing slowing construction. People standing on the line, people physically putting their bodies in the way. Watch the Line has been very active. As a matter of fact, we're very excited that some of our observations have been used in legal briefs and other filings. You can attend actions and rallies and offer prayers in Palisade or other camps as you've been invited. So these are ways to act on the front line. There's also some supporting and sustaining that we can do in solidarity, right? Material resources to the front line, services for frontline folks, funding for appeals, funding for the defense of those arrested. You might have a unique skill or capability that you can share with the group. Being a good relative means showing up to work, building relationships, and following and deferring to frontline organizers. I think Katie mentioned it earlier. What was it? Leave your ego at the door, something like that. The other is educating and amplifying. We can make a big difference here, following frontline media and amplifying and sharing information, disrupting and busting myths, watching for new camps to pop up, watching for needs to be broadcast, right? Getting into some of these other ways of gathering information than waiting to sit back and see if it shows up in our major newspaper. So here's an example of how this all fits together in Palisade, a welcome water protector camp on land owned by Winona LaDuke. And it's next door to where Enbridge plans to use horizontal directional drilling for one of the crossings of the Mississippi River. So the ask from frontline organizers is this: it's helpful if you give them notice and you let them know that your group is going to be there, even if it's just a handful of people. And you arrive by 10 o'clock, let's say, you're welcomed by the camp. And then you're there to do three things. One, prayer at the river with amplification. Organizers need there to be a message that prayer is part of this consistently, and a request for amplification on social media with posts and pictures. Number 2, plan to hold space at the construction site, chanting, singing, witnessing, etc. And it may feel lonely, but understand that this space has been held by Indigenous women and they're tired, right? Banners from the faith community, pictures, amplification, etc. It's all useful. So you see how that used that top left quadrant and the bottom right quadrant. The third thing, excuse me, the third thing is roll up your sleeves and help at camp. There are dishes to be done every day, wood to be chopped, snow to shovel, food to be cooked, right? Then be ready to depart by 4 or so and return home. But you see how that fits into this whole pattern. Now, Katie, I'm going to ask, is this where you want to jump in before I leave this slide and mention anything?
Quickly, I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I will just say that, yeah, this graphic was created by Karen Wills, who's the executive director of MUUSJA. So it's no coincidence that we have organized a series of workshops and events that correspond to these 4 quadrants. So a workshop on faith-based nonviolent direct action, workshop on leveraging your voice and privilege from a distance, one on colonization and being a good relative, etc. So some of these have taken place already and are available on recording, and some of them are still in the works. And additionally, MUUSJA is organizing virtual or in person. It'll be live streamed, so you can tune in virtually, or you can go in person to the camps. We'll be visiting each of the resistance camps that have sprouted up along the line, so so that you get a chance to kind of orient yourself to that space and see where you might fit into to the work that's taking place there on the ground. So these have been included in the Connect, and I will continue to include them in the Connect, these opportunities for engagement. And it's also on our Facebook page and on MUUSJA's Facebook page as well. So yes, so I'll let you continue, Rita, but that's just a little note that we are working closely with these quadrants to for UUs to engage here.
So Brett's going to help out by throwing some resources into the chat. If you missed it, there was a Prepare to Care webinar that was put on by a combination of MUUSJA, UU Ministry for Earth, and UUSC. And it provides great orientation and a variety of voices, right? Digital Rally to Stop Line 3 by MN 350, also very much a variety of voices out there. If you haven't seen GINIW Collective's video on blockading the Line 3 drill pad, it is absolutely worth watching. The Red Lake call from the Red Lake Tribal Secretary is on the Honor the Earth page. And recently, Science for the People came up with a couple of short videos that are excellent and worth watching. So this isn't exhaustive, right? This is just a way to expand anything else that you've been involved in, right? Give you some other places to go.
Rita,
and in terms,
I just
yes.
wanted to hop in real quick. The Mapping the Black Snake video by Science for the People, I watched that for the first time this morning, and it is such a great overview if you're looking for just a general orientation of the history and the science here. Really, really well done. And I also just wanted to mention there's a digital rally to stop Line 3 this Wednesday, actually at 2 o'clock. And that's put on by Honor the Earth, Minnesota Interfaith, Power and Light, and MUUSJA. So I'll go ahead and link that, or Brett can, and also include it in the Connect in our Facebook page, but that will include many Indigenous frontline activists sharing their thoughts on how you can best engage here.
And really, as a congregation, you're fortunate with Katie being there, being able to bring this to you, because it can be a little challenging, right, to track a lot of these pieces down. So having it come together and having Katie really be a focal point for us in Northern Minnesota really helps a lot. The resources to act are just opportunities, right? To go and experience, look at the list, look at the Welcome Water Protectors website. If you're interested in actually stepping out and doing some pipeline observations in Watch the Line, get online there, take a look at what's involved. You don't actually even have to go to MN 350 for the frontline supply drive, because as I understand it, Katie is doing that with UUCD. They're, bringing items out and letting you know what's needed at Palisades. Petitioning Biden right now, we would love for President Biden to take the action on line 3 that he took on KXL, right? That would put a stop to it. And there's a lot of work being done, a lot of pressure that we're trying to bring to say, understand the implications of this particular project. Please stop this. So any petition that you can find, and understand these things move a lot, right? This is not exhaustive. Every day there's something new that is coming up. Somebody is trying to find a way to say, hey, you need to take a look at this to the Biden administration. So earlier I showed you some things that were happening in the North Country, right, along the route. But most of those were being done by Enbridge and law enforcement. Now I'm going to show you some pictures of the things that we're doing up here, right? This is also happening in Northern Minnesota. And so we come to the question, right? The question for discernment. What are we called to do in this moment? Yes, as individual Unitarian Universalists, and even more powerfully, how are we called as UU congregations? This pipeline isn't going to stop itself. There's enormous strength in a UU congregation coming together to respond to a destructive and unjust project like this. Enormous strength in coming together to stand with our Indigenous neighbors. Christina Rivera, on the lead ministry team for Church of the Larger Fellowship, recently wrote about all that happened in 2020, and that more than any other year in recent memory, it can either be a catalyst for change or a footnote in history. She encourages us all to think about what our Unitarian Universalist faith calls us to be in this moment. And so I ask, will this story of line 3 be a catalyst for change or a footnote in history? I think the time to act is now. Thank you.
Well, the climate action team decided that we would bring a resolution when we heard there's a congregational meeting on February 14th. So we wrote this resolution, and I'm going to read it. It says, we, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Duluth, stand with the Indigenous water protectors of Minnesota in opposition to the construction of Enbridge's Line 3 oil pipeline from the tar sands of Alberta, Canada. At this time, despite pending lawsuits challenging its permits, construction is proceeding rapidly along the full Minnesota section of the pipeline. As stated by the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, the Line 3 expansion and the major increase in greenhouse gas emissions that would result from its operation is incompatible with a safe and healthy future for Minnesota. It is inconsistent with the U.S. treaty obligations, including its trust responsibility to protect the retained rights of Native nations. It would intrude on treaty territory where the Ojibwe have retained hard-fought rights to healthy fish and game. And it would create the risk of oil spills in ancient wild rice beds, village sites, graves, and other places that could never be restored. We add, As residents of the Lake Superior region, we also recognize the particular risks to the waters of Lake Superior, source of our drinking water, as the pipeline crosses the St. Louis River watershed to reach the refinery in Superior, Wisconsin. Therefore, UUCD publicly calls on the U.S. government and the Minnesota government to immediately rescind the permits for Line 3 construction. We encourage our members and friends to support the nonviolent work of the water protectors on the ground, as well as the legal actions to halt construction. That is the resolution that will be up for voting at the annual meeting next Sunday. And I think, you know, Rita has explained most of everything. I would say, I mean, there's a lot to say also about climate implications, and as a climate action team, we know there are some things that have already made this not a footnote in history, as Rita would say, this long struggle. The attorney, Paul Blackburn, the attorney for Honor the Earth, says that the 7-year delay has been really significant because the whole economic and political picture around fossil fuels has changed a lot now. And that's really important. The Minnesota Environmental Quality Board is looking at provisions that say climate must be included in evaluation of all projects. That has not been true by the MPC or any Minnesota state agency. So that is something that would change. There's also the big push for things like Clean Cars Minnesota going on, which is in the area of lowering demand. So there are actions around the climate part. I think the emphasis that we have today here is on being good relatives, understanding that we live in treaty territory, and we, as much as Indigenous people, are obligated to those treaties, which means to share respectfully the land with the Indigenous occupants, original occupants. So when we let this go, we actually are negating our treaty obligations that all of us have by being settlers on the land of the Anishinaabe people. So that's kind of the background for this resolution, and I'm hoping you'll be at the meeting next week, and we will have some discussion, as we always do in the congregation, on these resolutions. And I'll give it to Katie at this point.
Well, thank you so much, Beth. I'm just curious, Rita, if you could just maybe speak to a moment about the benefits to supporting a resolution like this as a congregation, as opposed to individuals within the congregation going out and doing this kind of work separately.
So much of the strength comes from really focusing attention and imbuing it in all of the congregational actions, right? It's sort of like how we think about President Biden and the Biden administration incorporating climate change into all of these different areas of administration, right? It's not just a silo. And so when a congregation commits to this, then it allows the congregation to then say, okay, how do we fulfill this? So we've committed to this thing. Now, what are we going to do to fulfill our responsibilities and our obligations to that? And remember, there are lots of things. I mean, things that I brought up, things that we might bring up even today, are only a tip of the iceberg, because once the congregation gets together and starts talking about it, the creativity, the opportunities really rise to the surface. How can we do this? How can we be good relatives? How can we be a good neighbor to our Anishinaabe neighbors, right? And so there's strength in it. There's also strength in when we're talking about that lower right quadrant, when we're talking about educating and amplifying. When a congregation can step out into the public square, living love out loud, right? Living our faith tradition out loud in the public square, and we can say that as a congregation, that is meaningful in our communities, very meaningful. And it has a much greater impact than me, Rita Chamblin, going out and saying something, right? Well known though I may be, than to have a congregation going out and saying something.